What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the JT Sports Podcast. I'm your host, JT. Yes, we do still talk college football on here. Right now, I know it currently is Super Bowl week. Obviously, we're going to be spamming a lot of Super Bowl content. We still do love college football, though. Even though I don't love what college football has become, I still love the sport. I can't go a day without thinking about college football. And if you don't know, I am a Miami Hurricanes fan. I've been a Hurricanes fan since I first got into college football 16 years ago. And the majority of my lifetime watching this team, they haven't really been that good. So to see them come out of nowhere, be in the national championship game, and to lose it, thanks to Carson Beck doing the game-winning book for Indiana, I just had to take a bye week from college football. But I'm back. And I don't know if I'm the only person that feels this way, but college football is no longer the sport that I grew up watching. Now, if you feel differently, let me know. But everything that made college football what it is today is now starting to be erased out of the sport. And I'll give you guys a few things that has made college football feel so different now than what it used to be years ago, and why I feel change is okay, but the changes that we have in this sport right now aren't good. What's the outlook for Miami entering the 2026 season with Darian Mensah at quarterback? What's going to happen with LSU this year? What's the ceiling? What's the floor for Lane Kiffin? Can they get into the college football playoffs in year one under him? I don't think it's off the table. The SEC just released their schedule for all the teams this season, and there's a huge problem with the SEC's decision to go from an 8-game to 9-game conference schedule. And Josh Pate, most would consider to be the face of college football media. Every time he has an opinion, everybody always has something to say about it. We're going to be giving our thoughts to his way too early top 25. If you live, eat, breathe, and die football, you have come to the right place. We're talking all things football, NFL, college football, 24/7, 365 days throughout the year. If you are a diehard football fan, you're a football junkie, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, turn on post notifications so you don't miss when we drop new content. If you don't want the starting quarterback of your favorite team to play like Anthony Richardson, give us a 5-star review. We're available wherever you get your podcast from, Apple, Spotify. If you enjoy the content, you want to support the grind, give us a 5-star review. The links are down in the pinned comment and description down below. Let's dive into it. I'm not as old as a lot of you college football fans are out there. I'm in my early 20s. I became a fan of this sport 16 years ago, back in 2010. And everything that made college football the sport that it is today is slowly being erased out of this sport. It's hard to even agree that college football still is college football because it doesn't feel that way. I go on Instagram and I see teams announcing player resignings, which is horrific to see, since if you're a guy like Dylan Stewart or Lenore Sellers and you've been balling out your first few seasons at South Carolina, why does it have to be big news that you're choosing to stay? You shouldn't want to leave. You should want to continue to try to bring back South Carolina football, one of the more underrated programs in the history of this sport. You've been playing damn near at a Heisman caliber level at times, so I don't get why, if you're Lenore Sellers, why you would even entertain the idea of possibly going elsewhere. Same thing with Dylan Stewart. If you're going to be a potential top 10 pick in the NFL draft, yeah, it shouldn't be breaking news that you're staying where you're at. Player resignings in college football make it feel like I'm watching the NFL. In the NFL, a player being resigned is huge news. It shouldn't be in college football because player resigning announcements don't belong in college football. It is absolutely disgusting that NIL and the transfer portal have corrupted college football the way that it has. It has killed the value of recruiting and developing high school recruits. Coaches rather get proven commodities out of the transfer portal, steal players off other rosters, rather than develop guys out of high school and help them reach the next level. Build a better brotherhood, because that's what football is. Football is the ultimate team sport, because in order to win consistently week after week, everybody has to be balled in. It has to be one team, one goal. But when you constantly are overhauling half of your roster every year via the portal, you're not bringing in guys that have equity with the program. You're not bringing in guys that are willing to sacrifice blood, sweat, and tears for it, as if you were mainly building your program up through high school recruiting. Because when a high school recruit commits to your program, even though money is a little bit of an incentive to get them to commit to your school, they're pledging to at least give you a year or two of where they're not just in the portal bag hunting. They're looking for the good fit. And I still believe that most high school recruits aren't truly just going everywhere that offers them the biggest bag. Because I don't think with the way that the transfer portal has kind of diminished the value of high school recruiting, a lot of these high school recruits are getting big bags. Like if you're a 5-star guy, like how Jeremiah Smith was, obviously you're going to get a very big payday. But for majority of 4-star recruits, you're not making as much compared to what guys in the portal are. So a 5-star receiver may get $800,000 from his top option, and the second option probably only offer him like $750,000. So I don't think the numbers are too far off to where the money is fully the reason why these high school commits are making their decisions to where they choose to play, with the preference of buying guys out of the portal that are more proven versus taking a chance on a high school guy that may not develop. Yeah, it makes sense in theory, but look at the two teams that were just in the national championship, Miami and Indiana. You can say Indiana was built through the portal, but not really, since a lot of those guys followed Curt Cignetti from JMU to Indiana, like D'Angelo Pons. He recruited D'Angelo Pons out of high school. There's a lot of players on that team that Curt Cignetti recruited out of high school. He viewed them as hidden gems that everybody was looking over because they cared too much about the star rating. Curt Cignetti goes about building Indiana the right way. It's not solely based on how many dollars can we give you, how big of a bag can we offer you. He doesn't have a team full of mercenaries. Teams like Texas, Florida State, though, seem to have a lot of them, though. And that's because they can buy everybody. And that's why I don't think they're going to end up going that far in the college football playoffs. Because history has still shown us that the teams that win national championships are mostly built through high school recruiting. And the transfer portal and NIL haven't just made the culture and locker rooms worse, but they've made offense worse. Offense in college football now has gotten so bad due to NIL in the portal, forcing these quarterbacks to chase the bag instead of chasing development, instead of trying to find a program that can better prepare them for getting that generational money at the next level. They just want to hop and go team to team, and they ruined their development. In the Big 12, they used to throw for 700 yards in every single game damn near. Now, Big 12 offenses, they just throw a bunch of checkdowns, RPOs, bubble screens all game long. And not just is this a Big 12 problem, but this is a college football program, a college football problem. College football offenses don't care anymore about trying to develop their players. They don't try to find ways to build an offense around the strength of their players. Instead, they rather play it safe, throw a bunch of short passes, a lot of quick screens, so they don't have to worry about possibly dealing with turnovers. They want to try to hide the lack of faith that they have in their players because they don't trust their player development, and they feel if they don't have a lot of money to spend in the transfer portal, it's impossible for them to put a halfway decent team on the field that they actually trust. And that's why you see so many teams running these conservative, scary-ass offenses. They don't trust their players unless they spent a lot of money on them. Not only has offense gotten worse in college football, but traditions in college football, which are the lifeline of what has made this sport such the fantastic product that it is, are no longer being honored. College football has been built off tradition. It's been built off historic rivalry games like USC, Notre Dame, who have been playing for over a century. They no longer going to be playing each other anymore. Georgia and Georgia Tech shouldn't be a neutral site game in Mercedes-Benz Stadium. Mercedes-Benz is a phenomenal stadium, but it should not be hosting Georgia Tech in Georgia. Bowl games weren't always meaningless back when I first got into college football. If you made it to the Orange Bowl, the Peach Bowl, the Fiesta Bowl, even if it wasn't a national championship game, it meant something to a lot of those players, knowing that we're not a national championship, but we're in a prestigious bowl game. And bowl games have lost their prestige due to the expansion of the college football playoffs. And the more the playoffs expands, the more we continue to damage rivalries in this sport, to damage bowl season. I know that not all change is bad, but a lot of the change that has happened in college football is not good. It's not for the betterment of the sport. And I know that what I'm about to say is a hot take, but college football was a lot better when players were getting paid underneath the table, when they were getting paid bands of money out of McDonald's bags. Now with you being able to pay players wide out in the open, college football, it's just unregulated. There's no rules. And I'm not against players getting paid. I'm not anti-NIL as far as players getting theirs. College football has been making millions off these players for so long. They deserve a slice of the pie. But the issue isn't players getting paid. The issue is the transfer portal is basically unregulated free agency. You shouldn't be allowed to steal players off another team that already have contractually agreed to play with them. And yes, I am talking about the Clemson Ole Miss situation. Clemson had a linebacker that they got out of the transfer portal from Cal that signed a contract to play for Dabo Swinney, and then a few weeks later, Pete Golden ends up hitting him up while he's in classes at Clemson and gets him to unenroll from the university and ends up being at Ole Miss. Something like that shouldn't be allowed to happen, nor should it be justified. Just because everybody else is stealing players off other teams in college football doesn't make it right. Dabo Swinney, when he comes out and he complains about this new era of college football, the lack of regulations, the lack of rules, the fact that players don't have to honor their contracts, they don't face no penalties from not honoring them, isn't Dabo Swinney being a crybaby? Just because somebody gets paid a lot of money to coach football doesn't mean they don't have a right to be frustrated with what's going on with them within their profession. If you were a head coach and you were in Dabo Swinney's shoes and you were getting paid millions of dollars, you'll be pissed off if teams like Ole Miss were stealing guys that contractually agreed to play for you. Because what's even the point of having these contracts if you're not going to honor them? Coaches leaving schools for better jobs is not the same as players hitting the transfer portal. Coaches just can't up and leave, not honor their contract without a penalty. And that penalty is a buyout. Every time a coach leaves for another job, the new school that they go to has to pay a fee in order to hire them. When it comes to guys hitting the portal, there are no penalties. Guys don't have to honor their contracts. They can leave whenever, and they don't have to face any massive repercussions financially. Coaches do, which is why Comparing coaches leaving for better jobs is not the same as players hitting the transfer portal. Coaches can't coach 7 different schools in 7 years like how TJ Finley has played for 7 different universities. The transfer portal rules are unregulated. There are no penalties. And with how this sport seems to not care about the whole tampering thing that's going on, you no longer are allowing college football to be properly maintained, which is why this sport is the way that it is. I hate talking about college football when it comes to how much overturn you see every single season across all these teams. And it's not just me being a traditionalist. I used to be one of the people that used to push back against traditionalists. I used to be one of those people raise my hand saying, yeah, I want to see the college football playoffs expand from 4 to 12 teams. But 16, 24 teams is just too much for me. Because now you no longer making a regular season meaningful. And I no longer feel like I have the same connection to college football as an adult as what I used to have growing up watching it as a kid. Everything that college football has been built on to get it to this point is now being torn down. Rivalries aren't respected. LSU, Alabama no longer is going to be an annual rivalry. It now is going to be a rotating rivalry. Every other year, you may see Alabama and LSU play. We may not ever see Notre Dame and USC ever play again. The Park-Tar Bowl is one of the best bowl games ever created, and it gets looked down upon since it's not a bowl game that has the right to be attached to a playoff game. You know, conference championships used to be very important. Now they aren't. We had Indiana and Ohio State playing in the Big Ten championship. Ohio State loses, and there's really no penalty to that. And not just is there no penalty to losing your conference championship, but there's no incentive to even making it to your conference championship to begin with, since some smart people out there thought it made sense leaving Alabama out of the college football playoffs because they earned the right to play in their conference championship game. You should never get punished for making your conference championship game while rewarding a team that didn't earn the right to play in theirs. That's just backwards logic to me. And the solution to this all from most folks is, well, let's just expand the college football playoffs to more teams. Let's make college football like the NFL. No, college football doesn't need to be like the NFL. There's nothing wrong with the NFL. There was nothing wrong with college football until you had more of the NFL influence polluting what made college football the sport that it used to be. There was nothing wrong with college football. We didn't have all these problems with this sport until the introduction of the transfer portal, until it was legal to pay these players out in the open. I prefer college football back during the time when they were paying players thousands of dollars out of McDonald's bags. I don't like how we have too much of the NFL influence in college football. The transfer portal is free agency. High school recruiting now seems like it's the NFL draft. The season is now starting to operate like the NFL. When you expand the playoffs to 16, 24 teams and you have auto bids, you essentially are saying that we're making the AFC, NFC equivalent in college football to the NFL. College football doesn't need to be like the NFL. Am I wrong for wanting college football to still be college football? On the surface, when you still watch college football on Saturdays, yeah, it somewhat still feels like college football unless you have Georgia and Georgia Tech being played in the bins. You have UCLA no longer playing in Pasadena. They're playing in SoFi Stadium. This NFL influence on college football is polluting and breaking down what this sport's foundation was built off. And nobody seems to care about that anymore. But me, am I the only one who hates how much the NFL feels like college football now is becoming? Because I don't. I like the NFL for what it is. And I've loved college football for what it used to be until now. Miami has made college football's biggest nightmare come true. For 2 decades, teams like Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia have been able to win national championships getting players out of South Florida. Now with Miami being back, proving that guys like Jeremiah Smith can stay home, get paid a bag, compete for national championships, playing big games, get developed to be high draft picks in the NFL, you no longer are going to see so many great players out of the South Florida area leaving home and going elsewhere, since there's no reason to leave home anymore. Miami has everything that you need: money, good player development, and you being able to showcase your talents on the biggest stages and the biggest games of the season. Miami is not only about to start locking down South Florida talent, but they're about to become one of the biggest recruiting juggernauts that college football has seen since the peak years of the Nick Saban dynasty. When Alabama was at their peak, not only could they recruit in South Florida, but they could recruit the West Coast, they could recruit Texas. They were a national recruiting powerhouse. And that's what Miami is about to become again. Not only are they going to get the best players out of South Florida to stay home, but Mario Cristobal from his time at Oregon also has developed strong ties from the West Coast. So he's able to get some of the best players out of the state of California, some of the best players out of the state of Texas. When Miami is at their best, this is one of the most recognizable programs in college football from a national level. Not just a national level, a global level. There are people that support Miami from Japan that's up 2, 3 a.m. in the morning watching Miami's college football playoff games. Alabama, Georgia, and Ohio State, with the reemergence of Miami, are now about to start getting worse because they no longer going to be able to take some of the best players out of Miami's backyard from their front porch. Because when Miami's good, players have no reason to leave. You can get developed, you can get paid good, and you can compete for national championships. There's about to be a big gap in the ACC between Miami and everybody else in this conference. The gap that Miami is about to have from a talent standpoint within the ACC compared to everybody else is going to be what happened with Clemson when they became a national championship contender in the mid-2010s. It wasn't really no competition at all. Sometimes we used to question Clemson's legitimacy and if they even should be in the playoffs when they used to get in during the 4-team era, because we didn't know how truly good they were since they were able to out-roster the entire ACC. Miami has such a large talent discrepancy between them and every other member of this conference that it's pretty safe to say Miami's going to be a consistent staple of the CFP from this point on. They're going to routinely win the ACC. They're going to get a regular auto bid in the playoffs. And more times than not, they probably are going to have a first-round bye thanks to them having less trap games than the top SEC and Big Ten teams. You don't have 4 national championship-capable teams coming out of the ACC every single year. At best, you may get a second team that's up there with Miami that occasionally can be able to compete for a national championship. In the SEC and the Big Ten, there are about 3, 4, maybe 5 teams every year out of these conferences that have the ability to win it all. So with the big talent disparity that Miami has over the ACC, it's not going to do anything but make it more easier for them to continue to be in the national championship picture. The only knock that most folks have had about Miami has been Mario Cristobal. But Mario Cristobal has improved as a head coach. His clock management, his understanding of situational football has greatly improved. He's made necessary changes on the coaching staff when needed. He fired his former defensive coordinator, greatly upgrades with Corey Heatherman, who's a finalist for the Jim Boros Award. You have Shannon Dawson, which, despite the grievances that Miami fans have with Shannon Dawson at times, he's one of the best offensive minds in the game. And the biggest strength of Mario Cristobal, recruiting and talent acquisition, makes it nothing but even easier for him to continue to win, even if he isn't the best game day coach. When you have such a big talent disparity between you and everybody else in your conference, you have a larger margin for error than everybody else. James Franklin can afford late game blunders, poor clock management at Virginia Tech, because that team isn't as talented as what Miami is. Even if you're an above average coach and you make a few mistakes, a talented enough team is good enough to bail you out in certain situations. Miami also has become a prime transfer destination for quarterbacks. You officially can call Miami transfer portal U for QBs. You get Cam Ward, Carson Beck, who leads you to a national championship, and now you get Darian Mensah, who may be the best of the bunch that you have gotten out of the transfer portal. Darian Mensah is going to win a Heisman Trophy at Miami this year. This is the most talented quarterback in America. Phenomenal deep ball accuracy, very good arm. He's going to be better than Cam Ward. Cam Ward, unlike Darian Mensah, his game wasn't predicated off playing within the structure of an offense. It was predicated off a lot of backyard football, being able to make things happen from broken plays. Darian Mensah is 1, 2, 3, get the ball out. Let's not hold on to the ball longer than we need to. Let's not try to make plays that aren't there to be made. Now, there are pros and cons to that style of play. There's going to be a lot of plays that Darian Mensah can't be able to make since he isn't willing to take the risk that Cam Ward was willing to take at times. But you can trust Darian Mensah a lot more in close games than what you could Carson Beck and Cam Ward. And Cam Ward was pretty clutch, but he did have a few moments like against Georgia Tech, against Syracuse, and his lone season in Miami where you kind of question his decision-making at times. I'm very excited about the Darian Mensah era at Miami that's about to come. Darian Mensah, when you have a quarterback as good as him, it's hard not to be back in the national championship discussion. The majority of teams that end up making it to the playoffs, what they all have in common is good quarterback play, or at least dependable quarterback play. Quarterback play oftentimes is the difference in a lot of outcomes of these games. When you have two evenly matched teams, quarterback play oftentimes is the difference. Look at how Miami lost the national championship to Indiana. Fernando Mendoza outplayed Carson Beck. Fernando Mendoza came up clutch more times than what Carson Beck did. And that's why Indiana currently is the national champions and Miami isn't. Darian Mensah could be for Miami this year what Fernando Mendoza just was this past season for Indiana. He doesn't make a lot of mistakes. He's very accurate throwing the football downfield outside the numbers. He's the kind of quarterback that, unlike Carson Beck, is going to rise to the occasion with the game on the line. You can trust Darian Mensah to win you a game. You don't have to play it safe, have a run-heavy approach because you don't want to put the ball in Darian Mensah's hands as much because you want to minimize mistakes. That's what you had to do with Carson Beck. And I'm not trying to use Darian Mensah to crap on Carson Beck because I respect Carson Beck for what he did for Miami. I will always respect Carson Beck for being the quarterback who finally got Miami back into the national spotlight, getting Miami back to playing in a national championship game. But let's not act like Carson Beck wasn't really a huge reason for why Miami couldn't have done more, why they couldn't have gotten more out of the season that they just had. I respect him for getting Miami back to the point that it did. He's a very good player. I think he'll have a pretty successful career in the NFL as a backup, a bridge quarterback. But Darian Mensah, there's a huge gap between him and Carson Beck. And he could be the second quarterback that transfers to Miami and ends up being a high first-round pick in the NFL. With the talent that's going to be surrounding Darian Mensah, you're going to have a lead offensive line. You're going to be throwing to Malachi Toney. Malachi Toney could very well win the Heisman Trophy with Darian Mensah throwing him the football. Hell, both Darian Mensah and Malachi Toney could both be Heisman finalists These are two of the best players in college football at their respective positions, and you put them on the same team? Yeah, Miami doesn't have to wait 25 years to be back in another national title game. They very much will be in the national championship picture this season with Darian Mensah, with Malachi Toney coming back. I have never been higher. I have never been more bullish on the future of Miami football than what I currently am right now. LSU is one of the most polarizing teams this offseason to talk about, since there's a lot of different ways that Lane Kiffin's first year could go. Now, I'm a lot higher on Lane Kiffin's move to LSU than what most people are. I feel that the floor with Lane Kiffin at LSU is insanely high, and the ceiling is even higher. I feel the floor for LSU this year is 9 wins. They possibly get into the CFP as a 3-loss team, and their ceiling, they could be good enough to finish undefeated, win the SEC, and be in the national championship game in only 1 year with Lane Kiffin being the head coach. With the college football playoffs being 12 teams now, it guarantees that you're going to get a lot of turnover year to year when it comes to the teams that you're going to see in the playoffs. You're not going to see the same 12 teams twice with this new playoff model. You had 8 new playoff teams this past season. With the rotating schedules, no divisions, and the Power 4 conferences, it makes it very difficult to make it back to the college football playoffs consistently, unless you're a team like Ohio State, Georgia, Alabama. You just recruit at such an elite level that despite the roster turnover that you may have, despite the varying difficulty of schedules you may get annually, you're still good enough that you're consistently going to have a spot in the dance. But for a team like Texas A&M, that largely benefited from having one of the more easier schedules in the SEC last year, I can very easily see LSU taking Texas A&M's spot in the playoffs this year. Texas A&M has a way more difficult in-conference schedule this season than what they had last year. Their toughest game was against Texas, and they lost that game. They didn't have to play Georgia. They didn't have to play any of the top 4 teams in the SEC this year. The only time A&M played any team that was around their ballpark was Notre Dame earlier on, Texas late in the season, Miami in the playoffs. They came very close to losing to Notre Dame, and they lost to Texas and Miami. And I'm not a big believer in Marcel Reed. I think he's a solid quarterback, but I don't think he's ever going to be a consistent enough passer for Texas A&M to make it back to the college football playoffs, to compete for a national championship. Texas A&M, with how difficult their schedule is this year, you got LSU, Bama, Oklahoma, all on the road. I can easily see them going 8-4 this year, and LSU going 10-2, 11-1, taking a playoff spot that A&M had last year this season. You could see Oklahoma fall off. You could see even Alabama miss the playoffs. When one team rises and improves, another team has to fall off and regress. And with LSU making the playoffs this year, somebody's going to have to fall off, and that team's going to be Texas A&M. The Lane Kiffin effect immediately raises LSU's floor to where it's a guarantee that they're going to win at least 9-10 games. Lane Kiffin has won big games throughout his time at Ole Miss. Did we seem to forget that he beat Kirby Smart? Have we seen to forget that this guy has won multiple top 25 games? Lane Kiffin, there's nobody better at utilizing the portal than what he is. He has the number 1 portal class right now. Sam Leavitt, Jordan Seaton. He has some of the best players that were available during this portal cycle on this year's LSU's team. He has a proven quarterback in Sam Leavitt. I trust Sam Levitt a lot more than I trust John Mateer, Marcel Reed. So you have one of the better quarterbacks in the SEC, and you have an insanely talented roster around him, and you have a guy in Lane Kiffin that's able to always squeeze the best out of his players. It's hard to see LSU not being in the playoffs this year. You retain Baker. You have a lot of impact players on the O-line, the defense. LSU isn't going to underachieve under Lane Kiffin the same way that they did under Brian Kelly, because Lane Kiffin is better at getting the most out of his personnel than what Brian Kelly was. You were always hearing the excuse from Brian Kelly that we don't have enough, we need more. If you would have gave Lane Kiffin a Heisman Trophy winner like a Jaden Daniels, and you give him elite neighbors, BTJ, 2 first-round caliber receivers, and a top-5 quarterback, he probably ends up making the playoffs with that. The ceiling with LSU under Lane Kiffin is a lot higher than what the ceiling ever was going to be with Brian Kelly. Brian Kelly was never going to bring a national championship to Baton Rouge. I can look at Lane Kiffin and have a lot more confidence that he can win a national championship at LSU, because he's always been a guy that's been able to do more with less, versus Brian Kelly being a guy who's always done less despite having a lot more than what he thought. It's no wonder why Notre Dame is having one of the more successful stretches of success under Marcus Freeman than what they were having under Brian Kelly. I'm very confident that LSU not only is going to win, but they're going to be in a national championship discussion around the end of this season, because I think that Lane Kiffin is going to hit the ground running, and he's going to do it as soon as this season at LSU. The SEC has just released their schedules for all members of the conference. This is their first year going from an 8 to 9 game conference schedule, which will also include one Power 4 out-of-conference opponent. And with the SEC having an additional conference game, it's supposed to raise their strength of schedule. It creates more ranked matchups, and that should make it a lot easier for them to get more teams into the college football playoffs. If Vanderbilt went 10-2 last season with a 9-game SEC conference schedule, or Texas went 9-3 with a 9-game SEC schedule, they would have had a stronger argument for getting into the playoffs due to the amount of ranked opponents that they were going to have to play, that these teams were going to be playing this season. Now, the downside of going from an 8 to 9 game SEC conference schedule is that there's a very high probability that the SEC adding an additional conference game cannibalizes this conference. And you see a smaller separation between the top teams in the conference and the rest of the other teams in the conference. You more than likely are going to see a cluster of 9-3 SEC teams that are going to be vying for a spot in the college football playoffs. Now, there's this unwritten crime that a 3-loss team in the college football playoffs is just completely disgusting. It's inexcusable. No 3-loss team should ever touch the CFP, no matter how tough their schedule may be. So since there's this unwritten law, it's a crime to put a 3-loss team in the playoffs, what's going to happen when you have a cluster of 9-3 SEC teams that with a 9-game conference schedule had to play an additional trap game, and you end up having maybe 1 or 2 teams that finish with less than 3 losses? Are you going to leave out a 3-loss LSU if they end up having multiple ranked wins against some of the better teams on their schedule? Are you going to leave off a 3-loss Texas team if they beat Ohio State, they are able to beat Texas A&M, but let's say they have an upset loss to Kentucky or somebody like that? The committee with the SEC going from an 8 to 9 game conference schedule is no longer going to be able to not value strength of schedule anymore. They're going to have an ultimatum. And that's going to be, do you honor the teams that are paper tigers, teams that are 11-1, 10-2, but they didn't play the same quality of schedule as what the SEC did? Now, you can complain about SEC bias all you want to. Yeah, there's teams every year in the SEC that are overranked. Missouri, Vanderbilt this year are a good example of that. But there are also teams in the SEC that actually end up being as good as what they were advertised to be. And there are teams that could come out of nowhere and be better than what some folks expected, like Vanderbilt. And there are teams that are overranked out of every conference. The Big Ten, Penn State was a top 5 team. Some people had them rated as the number 1 team coming into this season. And look what happened to them. Clemson was overranked. There's always a bunch of overranked teams in every single conference. And the SEC is no difference. But there are more teams that are deserving to be in the playoffs than there are teams that don't deserve to be in the playoffs despite their record. You are not always what your record says you are. Josh Pate says this all the time, and it's always facts when he says it. Being a 9-3 team in the SEC, playing a 9-game SEC schedule won't be the same as being an undefeated team out of the Big 12. If you're a team like Texas Tech, you don't have as many trap games in the Big 12 as what you were to have if you were in the SEC. Because the gap in talent between teams in the SEC is not that big. You can be a team like Texas A&M and get down by 30 points at half against South Carolina, because although South Carolina isn't as talented as what Texas A&M is, with them having guys like Lenore Sellers, Nick Harbor, Dylan Stewart, guys that are going to be potential high draft picks in the NFL, some of the best athletes in this sport. If they're playing their best football, those 3 guys alone are good enough to beat any team in America. You don't see that kind of talent disparity in the Big 10 or the Big 12 or the ACC, which is why 9-3 teams in the SEC this year with this 9-game conference schedule are going to have to get more benefit of a doubt from the committee than any other team outside of the Big 10. And I know that people are going to hate that. You're going to disagree with that. But you're going to have to ask yourself, what matters more? Scheduling good teams, quality opponents every single week, or scheduling weak out of conference opponents, only beating 2-3 ranked teams within your conference? And let's say you finish 10-2, 11-1. Are you still going to care about the record, or are you going to care about a team that played a schedule that was as good as anybody in America? And if you would have given anybody else that schedule, they very well could have had that same record. Because there's a high probability that Texas Tech goes 12-0 this year. But if you would have given them Texas' schedule, they very well could have went 8-4, 9-3. I'm not saying this to make another favorable hypothetical for the SEC. What I'm saying is that the roster talent discrepancy and the non-Power 2 conferences is a lot bigger to where they can just out-roster everybody. They don't have as many trap games because Texas Tech, if you have a $30 million roster and you're going up against Colorado that only could spend $20 million on theirs, yeah, you're going to have a significant talent advantage. And you saw that with Texas Tech. They had guys like Romello Height, David Bailey. You can obviously tell they spent a lot of money at the defensive line position. So in the SEC, you have teams that have a lot of defensive lines, O-lines, teams that have a lot of money poured into them, a lot of talent into them, to where the advantage that Texas Tech has over their Big 12 opponents wouldn't be the same advantage that they would have in the SEC, since the SEC is a much deeper conference with a lot more quality teams that are about the same level or a lot better than what Texas Tech is from a talent standpoint. And if you leave out a 3-loss SEC team this year with this 9-game SEC conference schedule, you are incentivizing making cupcake schedules and punishing teams that have difficult ones. You're valuing paper tigers more than strength of competition. All conferences in college football are not created equal. It is not a hot take. Playing in the Big 12 as a 12-0 team isn't as difficult as going 12-0 in the Big 10 or the SEC. And what's going to happen this year is you're going to have a cluster of 9-3 SEC teams that get left out. Coaches are going to be mad. School presidents are going to be mad because they're going to say, what was the point of increasing the difficulty of our schedule just to be penalized for it? And you know what's going to happen after that? You're going to have the expansion to 16 teams. I don't think we're going to go to 24 teams because 24 is an outrageous amount. But you're going to see the playoffs expand more because there's no point in having a difficult schedule if you're going to get punished for it. And no, in college football, it isn't you play who's on your schedule. You can create your schedule in college football somewhat when it comes to your out-of-conference opponents. You can manufacture your record. If you have a weak in-conference schedule and you have a weak out-of-conference schedule and you go 12-0, you shouldn't be rewarded for that, where you have SEC teams that are in the trenches duking it out every single week to where the conference has cannibalized itself. So the SEC going to a 9-game in-conference schedule is a very big risk. Because if the committee isn't going to honor strength of schedule, they're not going to honor the amount of ranked wins that you have. And we care so much about how the record looks instead of trying to get the best 12 teams in. You're setting a very, very difficult precedent that a lot of teams are probably going to follow suit with. Josh Pate, the future commissioner of college football, the pretty much face of college football media, has dropped his way too early top 25. I want to give my thoughts on the commissioner's poll because there's a lot of very interesting takeaways from this. For one, Josh Pate, you can still claim that he's a SEC homer, even though I don't really agree with that. I think that he's just actually right about how good the SEC is. It's still arguably the deepest conference in college football, and that's reflected by this poll since there are 9 ranked SEC teams in this thing. Now, of course, you're going to say that, you know, you're overhyping the SEC like always, but the only teams that I think he has a little bit too high are Vandy and Missouri. Now, Missouri has had the success they've had when they've won double-digit games because they've had a weak schedule, and they haven't really fared that well against ranked teams that they've gone up against. Now, you can make the excuse that they've had some injuries at quarterback and whatnot. Understandable, but I just never see Missouri being able to eclipse the success that they had a few years ago until like another 2-3 years. I think they're just one of those programs that very so often they're going to be good enough to be a playoff team. It'll take them like 3-4 years to reload and have a team that's good enough to even be worth consideration of the playoffs. Vandy, kind of the same way. Vandy doesn't recruit, nor do they have the NIL infrastructure to consistently be a 9-10 win team. I'm not saying they're going to fall off and go back to what they used to be a few years ago when they weren't making it to the bowl game. They pretty much were the Northwestern of the SEC. I think that Clark Lee has built a sustainable enough program to where their floor is at least 6 wins or more every single season from this point on. But like with Missouri, I think that they're only good for the occasional 10-win or better season every 2-3 years. Since they have to reload, they have to recruit very well, they have to develop very well, they have to strike on a lot of transfer portal additions, and some of those guys have to stay for a few seasons. Now, the Big Ten has 8 ranked teams. Now, I agree with all of the teams in the Big Ten that Josh Pate has on this thing. I feel Washington should be a little bit higher than 25. They have an experienced team. Damon Williams is going to be one of the top quarterbacks in the Big Ten. Their defense also should be really good. Jeff Fish is one of the best team builders in college football. He has a hybrid of an NFL college football philosophy. He's a very good play caller, so he gets the most out of everybody that he recruits, that he gets out of the transfer portal. And this is his third season now at Washington. When he first got to Washington a few years ago, this program was in a complete rebuild since Kalen DeBoer left. A lot of their top players left with them to Tuscaloosa, and also they lost a lot of players to the NFL. So this should be the best Washington team that we've seen since they last won the national championship. And also USC, they're at 11 now. I think that this is very bold for Josh Pate to have USC at 11, since you essentially are saying that they're going to be a playoff team this year. I'm not saying that I don't believe in Lincoln Riley, but it's still like, are you really confident that USC is going to be good on the offensive line? Are they going to be better on the defensive line? Are they going to be better on the line of scrimmage? Because we saw Oregon push them around with third stringers. And I know that USC had injuries on the offensive line also, but same did Oregon. And they had injuries on the defensive line too. So maybe it's just a Lincoln Riley thing. USC doesn't look as good on the road as what they do at home. I'm not saying that USC won't be good enough to be one of the top 12 teams in college football. It's just more so like I'm taking a wait and see approach on USC. I probably would have them somewhere in the top 17, top 15, because this should be a very good team. Now, I do think that when it comes to some of these Big 12 teams like Texas Tech, I would put them over A&M and Oklahoma, just because I think with the additional Brendan Sorsby, they'll get better quarterback play than what OU and A&M did. Also, they don't have as much of a gauntlet to go through to get to the playoffs, to get to their conference championship games like how OU and A&M will have. And I do think that Texas Tech, if you were to put them in the SEC, they will be among the better teams in the conference. Now, the Big Ten, he's giving them more respect than the SEC. So for all you people calling Josh Pate a SEC homer, look at his top 5. He has 3 teams out of the Big Ten in his top 5. And the only one that you really can make an argument that deserves to be in the top 5 from the SEC really is Texas. Like, I think that Oregon is much better than what Georgia is. They'll be much improved on the O-line. I think with what they have coming back at receiver also, Evan Stewart, they'll be really good. Dante Moore comes back. With Georgia, I still feel like we have some concerns about their pass rush. Their secondary had some up and down moments at times. Now, Notre Dame being the best team in college football shouldn't really be a hot take. I have more certainty about Notre Dame than what I have about Texas and Ohio State. They're replacing a lot of guys for the league that they lost to the transfer portal as well. In Texas, Ohio State, they're going to have a lot of new faces on defense. They return a good amount on offense. But, how is the hiring of Arthur Smith as their new OC going to go? Is Ryan Day going to be able to strike gold from the NFL twice? Texas is more so this year's equivalent to what Penn State was last year. They've gone all in this offseason, bringing in Will Muschamp. They get Cam Coleman from Auburn out of the portal. So it's championship or bust for Texas. And we very well could see their season maybe go the same way that Penn State season went last year. Or they could end up being as good as what they're expected to be. But I feel Notre Dame at 1 is something that it's a safe pick. If you're picking your number 1 team right now to be as good as what you expect the number 1 team to be and not look for a disappointment, I think that Notre Dame is a safe pick. Now, I believe that their ceiling isn't as high as what Ohio State, Texas, or even Miami's ceiling could be. But I think with what they have coming back, CJ Carr proving that he's a really good quarterback, a very good coaching staff, you can't get mad at them being number 1. And they also have a backloaded schedule. Now, the front end of their schedule isn't really that good, but the back end, they got a month where they have to play BYU on the road, Miami, SMU, somewhere down the line to end the season. So those are going to be 3 very tough games. And with the way they're scheduled in the second half of this season, it should help them get into the playoffs, and they can afford at least one loss. And I think that we could see Notre Dame go undefeated this year. They got a favorable schedule to where, you know, they have the best teams that they play on the back end of their schedule. So it's like when they're beating up on the jabroni teams, on the not so good teams, you know, like it gives them time to prepare for some of the better teams that they're going up against. So I like Notre Dame at number one. I'm not against it. I personally probably would go Texas at one, Miami at two, but I'm not mad at Notre Dame at one. He's very high on the wild card teams. I've been peeping that. And wild card teams to me are teams that are good enough to be a playoff team, but they're also there's also a floor that is very, very low. Like they could be a playoff team, but they also could go 7-5, 8-4. And those teams are LSU. Like I believe in Lane Kiffin. I said that earlier during this episode. I believe that LSU is going to be a playoff team this year. And I do believe that their floor is 9-10 wins, but I also could see a year where maybe they have a few injuries. With this being a portal-heavy team, like is LSU going to have enough depth to overcome some injuries that are going to occur with the rigors that comes with having a 9-game SEC schedule? USC at 11, with Lincoln Riley, you more so still believe that based on what he has done at Oklahoma, based on what he did his first year at South Cal, that, you know, he's had to go through a little bit of a rebrand with this USC program, and he did say that he was changing a lot with the philosophy of this program last year, and you saw those changes last year, but it's the defense going to take the next step under Gary Patterson. Penn State at 15. I'm not against Penn State being this high. Matt Campbell has essentially imported Iowa State to Penn State, and Iowa State, before they had injuries last year, is one of the better teams in the Big 12. Now, does a team mostly from one of the better teams in the Big 12 get you a lot of success in year one if you're Matt Campbell at Penn State? Because playing in the Big 12 with Big 12 players, you know, isn't going to be the same as playing in the Big 10 with Big 12 players, since the competition is a lot more tougher. We'll see. Now, I do think that Josh Pate, while he's not an SEC homer, he is falling a little bit of a victim to the SEC recency bias. He has a lot of the playoff teams from the SEC last year ranked very highly. Texas A&M, Oklahoma, Ole Miss, and then he has Missouri, Vandy, who are on the outside looking into the playoffs. The thing with the SEC this year, with how the schedule is lined up, I don't think we're going to see three of the same playoff teams from last year make it out of the SEC this year. I just think that we're destined to get some new faces in the playoffs out of this conference. I think that one of the first-year head coaches, not named Lane Kiffin, like Alex Golish, maybe John Summerall at Florida, could hit the ground running and have success early, considering the situations that they're taking over, good quarterback situations as well, with proven offenses. Vandy, Missouri, I just think that they're programs that they're going to peak every 3-4 years. Every 3-4 years, you'll see Mizzou, Vandy be good enough to be a possible playoff team. But in the other years, you know, they got to recruit. They got to use the portal to quietly rebuild that roster up to that point. Kind of what Kentucky used to be under Mark Stoops when they were at their best. When Kentucky football was at their peak under Mark Stoops, they won a consistent 9-10 win team every single season. There'll be a lot of 7-win, 8-win seasons. Then the occasional 3-4 years comes around, Kentucky was good enough to win 10 games. So that's kind of how I view Mizzou and Vandy. I don't think that it would be egregious to have Tennessee on here, even though you do have concerns, you have questions about how their quarterback situation is going to pan out. If Joey Aguilar doesn't get another year of eligibility, I would love to see maybe Auburn on here. I think that Auburn of Alex Golish could surprise a lot of folks. Florida could be on here, but Vandy, Mizzou, A&M, Oklahoma, I feel a good amount of these teams aren't going to be as good as what they were last year. If I had to bet my money, more so A&M, Mizzou, Vandy will be the teams that fall off. Oklahoma, a lot more sustainability, a lot better of an infrastructure when it comes to name, image, and likeness than what Mizzou and Vandy have. A lot more of a higher ceiling with what they can do in the portal, what they can do with recruiting and player development. So these are my thoughts, my reaction to Josh Pate's commissioner poll. I agree with the rankings mostly. Oh, and I almost forgot this. The Big 12 is very interesting. He has Utah at 19 and Houston at 18. Now, Houston is viewed as a team that's a little bit of a sleeping giant since, their basketball program's really good. And if you're spending a lot of money on basketball, why weren't you be able to allocate a little bit of those funds to the football program? And Willie Fritz is known as a program rebuilder, a program builder, whatever you want to describe him. And Houston was pretty good this year. Utah, I think they could fall off a little bit without Kyle Whittingham. I know that the new head coach they had was like their choice for the head coach in waiting. He's waited his turn for a few years. They do return their quarterback, and they got a pretty solid squad. But, I don't know. I feel there's going to be a team in the Big 12 this year that kind of comes out of nowhere and ends up being that third team behind Texas A&M and BYU. Maybe it's Arizona State. I know y'all might laugh at me for still believing in Colorado, but they've brought in a pretty good transfer portal class. I like their quarterback a lot and Juju Lewis, so we'll see how that pans out. But the Big 12 has always had that reputation of being the out-of-nowhere conference where you have teams that come out of nowhere every single year that we didn't expect to be good. So these are just my thoughts on Josh Pate's way too early top 25, the commissioner's poll. I would love to see your thoughts in the comment section down below. And I appreciate you guys for tuning in to this episode of the JT Sports Podcast. I will see you guys shortly with another episode.